The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Trump versus Clinton, 17 statewide ballot measures, and a full lineup of local and state races. Election year 2016 is finally coming to a decision point.
We survey the landscape one last time before the votes are counted and set the stage for our live election night show. The game is politics. The game is on.
Hi, I'm Kevin Mullen.
And I'm Mark Simon. Welcome to the game.
So much has happened this unprecedented campaign season that it's hard to sort it all out. A presidential race unlike any other, a series of ballot measures covering everything from pot to guns to plastic bags, who's going to vote and how.
What will we be watching for on election night? We're joined by two old friends, Menlo College political science professor Melissa Michelson and political analyst Bob Marks. I think I've heard that name before. To preview election night and give us a sense of how things are trending. Both Melissa and Bob will be providing commentary throughout the evening on our Peninsula TV live election night coverage. Welcome back to you both. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming on election night. Let's start with the presidential race. What's your best sense of what's going to happen, Melissa?
I'm sensing blowout is going to happen. I think as soon as the polls close in California, they'll call it for Hillary Clinton. I think there's so many states that are leaning in her favor already that really California and the other West Coast states it's going to be extra, and she'll already have it.
Now, blowout doesn't necessarily show up in the popular vote, it shows up in the electoral vote. Is that right, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think, I'll put it in terms you can understand. If your team is playing in a baseball game and you're behind 10-4, and you rally it towards the end and you lose 10-8, you still lose. Yeah. So I agree that Clinton is likely to be the winner, but I think it's very plausible that Trump can make the race close, particularly in the Electoral College. He's always had the ability to get to 266 electoral votes. The problem that I've had is in order to get to 270, he has to win one of 6 states that he's been trailing by 5% or more throughout the election. So,
given his inability to acknowledge things haven't worked out for him, I've been trying to speculate in my own head about how is he going to turn a loss into a victory. Is it conceivable he could say we've started a national movement? I don't think the election is rigged is going to carry much. It's going to take him very far.
Yeah. I think he's going to do all of the above. Yeah. And I do think
a couple of things we haven't thought about.
The thing about the election is rigged. I mean, we all know that in order to do that, the elections are run by counties, and that's not likely to have this massive rigging of the election. But the fact is, about 70% of the Republican voters today believe that if Hillary Clinton wins, that somehow the election was stolen. That's sobering numbers.
So I wanted to ask our professor about this issue around voter fraud. There's lots of confusion out there. My understanding is voter fraud is minuscule. There are issues with voters who move from county to county and are left on 2 different counties' voter rolls. There are some issues there, but in terms of voter fraud, this is not a real issue. Is that right?
In-person voter fraud in terms of voter impersonation or people trying to vote when they shouldn't is extremely rare, almost never happens. It's mostly something that's become a politicized issue that Republicans have built up as a concern that has been used to legitimize new rules about restrictive voter ID laws or other measures to restrict the vote or to purge voter rolls. But study after study has shown that there's really not, there's like none. There's no in-person voter fraud going on. That is what people think of when they think about voter fraud.
I'm sorry, but you keep making the distinction in person.
Yeah.
Increasing numbers, like vastly increasing numbers, are voting by mail. Do you think there's a much higher likelihood of fraud in an instance like that?
Absolutely, and again, reports have shown that as well, because not only can absentee ballots be filled out by somebody else, but there can be voter intimidation. Either a spouse or community leader can intimidate people into voting a certain way with an absentee ballot. And the thing about that kind of voter fraud, though, is you don't stop that with the kinds of voter fraud measures like voter ID that we have in place. So that's increasingly an issue of concern, but it's not what people think of when they think of voter fraud. When they think voter fraud, they think, undocumented immigrants going to the polls and voting when they shouldn't be allowed, when they're not allowed to, and that doesn't happen.
I always think of Chicago myself. But.
Right,
I just
or that.
mentioned on the vote by mail piece, and California is moving toward more of a vote by mail model, a San Mateo County model where we had our pilot project. The primary issue, as I understand it, is the signature on the back of the ballot. Family members will sign for other family members, and then the signatures can't be properly compared. 20,000 ballots were thrown out in the 2012 election. So it's an issue of sort of the mechanics of how vote-by-mail ballots are returned and the signature piece, which is a primary issue, but we have good folks working on that right now, so just wanted to clarify.
And there are definitely ways to prevent that kind of voter fraud. So I'm not saying that it's rampant and that nothing's been done about it.
One thing that troubles me a little bit, I don't think there's significant voter fraud out there. But for one example, if I'm not a citizen and I register to vote and I say that I am a citizen, there's no cross-checking of that. And so it would not be that difficult, probably cost some money, to be able to do that against a database to be able to determine. Now that's something that potentially down the road could become more of an issue, but again, I think we can all trust the ultimate outcome of this election.
One of the other things that's been slippery in this election is the varying predictions of voter turnout. How are women going to vote? How are Latinos going to vote? Are they going to turn out in significant numbers? As we get this close to the election, what is your sense of the makeup of the electorate who are going to participate in this election, Melissa?
There is massive enthusiasm for voting among the communities that are energized by this campaign, especially the Latino community, Muslim American community, the African American community. There are large numbers of people reporting to pollsters that they are more excited to vote this year than they were in 2012, particularly among the members of the Latino community. Yeah. So I think we're going to see massive turnout there. And I think that's why, going back to what we were first talking about, we're going to see a massive electoral college landslide because they're going to turn Arizona, they're going to make Texas close, they're going to turn Georgia. So states that would normally be in the Republican column are going to go for Hillary Clinton because of this massive enthusiasm among Latino populations.
As of this moment, we don't know how they're going to go, but certainly there are states in play that historically you would never think would be in play.
Well, yeah, I think they are. I think the whole discussion of this election comes down to who you think is going to vote. And when people say the polls are fake and all of that, they're not. It's how you set up your model and how you determine who's ultimately going to vote. If you believe that the voter turnout, and it sounds like you do, is going to be similar to what we saw in 2012, then Clinton is going to win, and she'll probably win a large number of those states that are now within the margin of error. If you believe that she's going to have trouble attracting the level of millennial voters, and then with those millennial voters, you start to impact the Latino vote and the African American vote, then the race is going to be closer.
Well, and it appears you think that she's going to have that problem.
Well, I think she's had that problem throughout. There's always the possibility as we get closer that the energy level rises. But I think there's an equal chance that she will have that problem. It's going to be marginal at best, but marginal makes a huge difference in 6 or 7 states right now that are within 2 points.
Well, we'll be back in a marginal matter of moments. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. This is Kevin Mullen. Over here, we have Melissa Michelson, Menlo College professor, political science professor, and Bob Marks, whose credentials I've forgotten entirely. But he's an expert on baseball, apparently. This is our election night preview. Both Melissa and Bob are going to be with us on our All Night Alive election show. Kevin and I are going to be there too, but you really want to dial by to see these two. We were talking about the presidential election. That's a shock. We touched a little bit on minority voters and women voters. How much of a difference is our women voters making? I mean, she's winning them by maybe historic margins, Bob.
Yeah, I think they're making a difference, and in particular, when you start looking at the ultimate outcome of the race. Trump's problem has been suburban and in some cases Republican women. He's alienated them. And so rather than getting 92% of the Republican vote, right now he's probably getting 85, 87% of the Republican vote. That's a problem. He needs to get to 92% roughly in that area to have any chance of winning.
So I want to ask just about the larger dynamics of the race, if I could, and I know the professor wanted to jump in on the question of women voters, but the larger dynamics here, I've heard it's a change election. Hillary represents the status quo. Aren't we in a situation where if Donald Trump were half a candidate, I mean, you follow this very closely through the primary process, he obliterated the field, but he's making so many errors. I mean, it seems like not ready for prime time. We're dealing with a political rookie who cannot compete. Keeping our baseball theme going here, like he may be a double or triple A guy, but he cannot play in the major leagues. And that's what this is right now. And he's simply not staying on message. He's not able to compete. That must be very frustrating for Republicans who want a win.
Yeah, I think there's no question that that's frustrating. But like with any candidate, you get what you get. I mean, he obliterated the field in the Republican primary because of who he is. His problem was always going to be trying to reach out beyond that 40% that he's gotten. If you look at the polling throughout, he's never really been able to get much over 40%.
But historically, this should have been a good year for the Republicans. It's unusual in the modern era for one political party to win 3 elections in a row. So coming off of 2 terms of Obama, it should have been the election for Republicans to win. And because Trump is such a weak candidate, that's why part of why Hillary Clinton is doing so well. If there had been another Republican candidate, maybe one who wasn't a rookie, a little bit more major league experience, it'd be much closer, and it would be much more likely to be a Republican taking the win.
It's such a fractured electorate. I mean, you've got the Bernie millennials on one hand, you've got really hardcore conservatives. You know, we've all been doing this a long time, maybe more hardcore than I think I've ever seen in my lifetime in terms of hewing to the right on a really hard line. And you know, so you talked about it being a change election. Do you think it could have been, or is it the kind of election where God bless whoever wins because it's a mess no matter what happens?
Yeah, we're so polarized right now. And of course, the Republicans are already saying on her first day, Republicans are going to start blocking her in Congress. And so even if Democrats take the Senate, the House will still be controlled by Republicans, and they'll still be there to be obstructionists, to do investigations, to do oversight. And the same thing would have happened the other way. If a Republican were to win, right, then Democrats would take up the lead in terms of being obstructionists. So because we're so polarized, either way, we have so much gridlock today.
And, you know, I think once these 2 candidates were nominated, our future was destined to have a president, whoever won, to be the least popular president that we've ever seen elected on Election Day. Assuming that Hillary Clinton wins, she's got, you know, the Republican Party that's dead set against her, even those that are voting for, independents significantly against her, and a large segment of her own party that will probably vote for her, but do so knowing that they don't trust her, that they believe that she's part of the problem. So governing in that kind of an environment, what happens is the minute you get into trouble, you turn around and you don't have any friends. Yeah. And it was going to, the reverse was going to be the same.
They have the highest negatives of any 2 candidates ever.
You know, I wonder if some of the expectations are out of whack. I mean, this is a state that sends Darrell Issa and Barbara Lee to Congress and expects them to work together. They can't even stand each other. You know,
Well, we'll see if Darrell Issa gets reelected.
Well, there's that, I suppose. But, either way, it's how does somebody make this work? Or is it just 4 years of misery that we're looking forward to?
Yeah, what does Paul Ryan do?
4 years
What does Paul Ryan do?
Paul
with
Ryan
this?
is the obstructionist, and the presidency continues the way it's continued under Barack Obama and how it was under George W., that they do more independent efforts, they do executive orders, they do what they can as president that doesn't involve Congress, because Congress is going to block them. But actually, presidents can do a lot without Congress, thanks to expansion of presidential power under the last two presidents.
Well, and it doesn't hurt any that Congress doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Paul Ryan's going to remain Speaker for a long period of time. I think he's in the Boehner situation, which is that a growing number of people within the Republican side are really angry at Paul Ryan.
Well, especially if they lose 20 seats or something.
Well, they're angry at him, I think, right now more because they think that he and others have not helped Trump in the election. So I think there's a lot of bitterness. I think Trump is going to blame the Republicans. He's going to blame the media. He's going to blame the rigged election, all of those things that we talked about before in the end. But keep in mind, he represents a large segment of the Republican voters.
Right.
Yeah.
And he wants to be president. From what I hear, 4 years from now, you probably don't want to run for that job while you're the sitting House Speaker. Yeah. So I sort of anticipated at some point he would step down anyway in order to run for president. But lots of upheaval in terms of where both parties sort of land after this election and what that dynamic is with that new Congress. And our new president. So we'll have a lot of fodder for future shows.
If there's upheaval, that's a prime opportunity for us. Yeah. We're going to be live on election night, but right now we're still talking to Bob and Melissa. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. He's Kevin Mullen. Over here we have Melissa Michelson and Bob Marks. They're going to be two of our sustaining experts on election night. We're going to be live on election night covering all the Peninsula stuff, along with a few other items that might be coming up. And speaking of a few other items, let's talk real quick about control of Congress. Do the Democrats win the Senate? Is there a chance for them to win the House, Melissa?
No.
Yes, they win the Senate? No, they don't win either one.
No, they don't win the House. They do win the Senate, and they have it for 2 years, and then in 2018 it goes back to the Republicans. So there'll be a narrow window of opportunity for some stuff, but really, as we were just talking about before, I think it's mostly going to be an obstructionist Congress.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see in the Senate is you're going to see 50-50, 51-49, maybe 52-48. You have a lot of close Senate races right now. I think you've got a half dozen that could go either way. But if I were a betting man, I would say that the Democrats win the Senate narrowly. The House was never in play. And as Melissa has pointed out, you're going to have a lot of obstruction.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the California ballot. 17 measures, no waiting. And as we said in the top of the show, ridiculous array of issues. Let's start with Prop 64, legalization of pot. You think that passes?
I think it passes, and I think local governments already know it's going to pass. The Palo Alto City Council is already passing regulations for how to deal with it. I know other local governments are also thinking about it. So there's pretty much this assumption that it's going to pass, and so now the question is, how do we regulate it? How do we make it work for our communities?
Yeah, I think it's going to pass. I think it's going to pass by a significant margin.
Yeah. What other ballot measures are you watching, Bob?
You know, I mean, 61 is interesting in that you've got Bernie Sanders in favor of it, and then seemingly all the money in the whole world against it.
Is that the Medi-Cal fee?
That's tagging prescription drug prices to what's paid to the VA.
Yeah. And so, you know, I think that's interesting. You've got a lot of measures on there where there are a lot of agendas that are even hard for somebody who pays attention to try to figure out what's going to happen.
So I'm always interested, there's often a push to put these things on in a presidential cycle,
Yes.
given the level of turnout. But then now we've loaded up the ballot with 17 of these things, we collectively in the state, not the state legislature, although we put 1 or 2 on there. But the question that I have is always, you know, we've got this 200-page state ballot pamphlet. How many folks are reading through that? And Trump-Clinton is the Super Bowl of politics. All the media coverage goes there. Very little knowledge being shared, I think, about the details of these 17 measures. And you just wonder how voters sift through all of this and make a decision. I mean, clearly they will on November 8th, but there must be ballot drop-off by the time you get toward the bottom of those initiatives, almost like a voter fatigue when you go in the polling booth or sitting at your kitchen table. Can you just, Melissa, talk a little bit about that?
Normally, voters make up their minds about these ballot propositions mostly on the basis of television commercials, because even when there aren't 17 of them and a big presidential race to watch, that's just the easiest place to get your information. And this year there haven't been as many, partly because of all the other stuff going on, and so people are not informed. I think we're going to have massive amounts of folks just skipping those items on the ballot. And I'm getting more questions this year from students, from neighbors, from friends saying, can you tell me, you know, what's up with this proposition? What do you think about this proposition? Much more so than in previous years.
I think a lot of people get frustrated, and when they get frustrated, they tend to vote no or just skip over them completely. It's a lot easier to defeat one of these than it is to pass one of these. But, you know, you have so much going on. You've got the Democratic Party apparatus, organized labor, the education lobby, all of those people sifting out information to their people. And so all of those things come into play.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, you know, you've got Gavin Newsom, who has pushed the Prop 64 the pot initiative very heavily. You've got Tom Steyer on TV everywhere advocating a whole bunch of things. I'm not quite 100% sure, other than advocating Tom Steyer. But you've got a Senate race. Give us a sense of who you think will be the major winners coming out of this election, especially in California.
Well, Gavin Newsom, for sure. I mean, he's associated with the proposition about ammunition and also with marijuana. He's clearly setting himself up for a future run to be governor, and I think he's going to get a lot of good publicity out of this election.
Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree at this point to the extent that anybody comes out of this election as a winner. I think it's him. I think what we're seeing, though, is we're seeing the foundation for a pretty interesting gubernatorial primary on the Democratic side coming up in 2018.
Never too soon to start talking about the
That's
next
right.
election. Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Trump one more time. What happens if he loses? What does he do? And also, has his brand been damaged? I mean, I'm reading about the playoffs, and Adrian Gonzalez from the Dodgers refuses to stay in the Trump hotel that the team is assigned to when they're there for the playoffs.
I think we're going to see Trump TV.
Yeah.
I think it's too tempting for he and Roger Ailes not to create a television entity, which, quite frankly, could become, you know, have the largest audience amongst cable TV networks.
Trump vodka.
Well, yeah,
Trump.
you know, I mean, it'll do whatever he wants it to do, and I think that's significant. I mean, I think if he creates that entity, if he continues to talk about his movement and how the election was taken away from them, I think that, you know, it's going to play a role down the road.
He didn't get this far without tapping into something, did he?
Exactly. There are a lot of folks who feel very passionately that Trump is right and that, you know, what he is saying is what people need to hear. And his brand has suffered. There are residents of his buildings lobbying to have the name Trump taken off of their building because they're embarrassed. There are people returning their Ivanka Trump dresses. He needs a new source of
Bob
revenue.
has turned all of his back in,
Right.
Yeah.
including the pumps.
So he needs something, and I think Bob's right that this is going to be a moneymaker for him and something that can keep his popularity going for him.
Yeah.
So just on this Trump issue, he's solidified his supporters around his brand,
Right.
yet alienated lots of others, but he's still going to get 40% of the vote or something.
Yeah.
Millions and millions of people casting a ballot for him. I guess I am most interested in the core economic anxiety concerns of some of his supporters in the upper industrial Midwest, for example, where manufacturing has been decimated and so forth. Chris Matthews yesterday made the suggestion that Hillary Clinton, should she prevail, she ought to be listening to what is at the underpinning of that support. Forget about the immigration stuff, the racism, misogyny. We're talking about just that segment of his support that is around.
Well, it's tied together, right? Because the economic insecurity is tied to the idea that the reason you're feeling economically insecure is because immigrants are taking your jobs, or that your job has been outsourced.
And you get the last word on this show, except I'm going to ask Bob if he's ready to predict that Assemblyman Kevin Mullen will be reelected. You'll have to dial by Penn TV on election night to find that out. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kevin Mullen.
Thanks for being with us, and join us next time on The Game, and also on election night. We'll be here live to give you all the returns.